Well, we intend to provide in the legislation that will be brought up in the General Assembly the ability for communities to reimpose that tax if they want to. I would not suggest it. I think that it is not proper to be taxing food.
It's basically shifting the blame. There's zero benefit to taxpayers when the governor eliminates the grocery tax and then asks municipal governments to reapply it on the other side of the equation.
That's just some of the back and forth on the idea of getting rid of Illinois' grocery tax as part of the fiscal year that's set to begin June 1st. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for hanging out. Or is it July 1st? I think it's July 1st. That's when the fiscal year starts for Illinois. So the governor proposed eliminating the grocery tax. It's only 1%, and he wanted to make that permanent. After back in 2022, if you recall, there was a 12-month period that they suspended that 1% grocery tax as a way to ease inflation, which is interesting because at that time inflation was out of control. Well, you were talking like 15% inflation on some industries, and food prices up, energy prices up. It was pretty wild. I mean, inflation's still pretty high, but it's not as high as it was in 2022. But even the governor and Democrats and Republicans, when they froze the grocery tax at 0% for 12 months, there were concerns about the impact to local governments that are the beneficiaries of that grocery tax, that 1% grocery tax, $1 on every $100 you spend on groceries. So the governor, at his budget address earlier this year, he said, we're going to eliminate the grocery tax altogether. Well, then that sparked local governments being like, well, how are you going to replace this? It's like $375 million or something. That's going to be a hit to local governments. How are you going to replace this? And Republicans have been saying, well, there's a plan to allow for them to get more of the local government distributive fund, which we're getting into the weeds here, so bear with me. The LGDF is the fund that was ultimately set up to ensure that local governments don't impose their own income tax. So when Illinois was decades ago getting an income tax, they wanted to make sure that like Chicago and Cook County couldn't level their own income tax on top of a state income tax on top of a federal income tax. So they came to this agreement for the local government distributive fund where they would get 10% of all of the income tax that the state of Illinois collects, and that would be distributed to local governments. But that 10% threshold hasn't been the case for quite some time. So right now, I think it's a little over 6% or so they get, not that full 10% of the income tax going to local governments. So Republicans are saying, hey, give the local communities their share of the local government distributive fund, and that'll help cancel the loss from the getting rid of the grocery tax. Well, Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday, he was talking about the new program he has dealing with food insecurity in some places and having a taxpayer subsidized program to prop up grocery stores. And he was in Chicago at a co-op talking about this and responding to some reporters' questions about the viability of these taxpayer subsidized grocery programs to prop up grocery stores in so-called food deserts.
Recognize that it's hard to start a business, and even with a little help up front, sometimes it's an equity investor. In this case, it can be an equity investor and the state. It can be loans from local government. So it's hard to build a small business. We should all recognize and support small businesses. As a result, we want them to succeed. Second, I do think that that an important role that government can play is to monitor the success of these initiatives, make sure that we're not feeding into a losing proposition for the state and its taxpayers. So it isn't the job of the state to continually support something that doesn't work. But let me point out that this has worked in other parts of the country. In fact, my team traveled the country to see where this has succeeded and what kinds of programs have helped them succeed in places like Kansas, just to give an example. And we're replicating something that's already successful. So we expect that, of course, there are going to be circumstances where some of these won't make it. But we also recognize that this program has been successful when it follows a certain set of guidelines, and that's what we've set up for this pilot program, and we're extending the pilot program, and we'll watch it, and if it isn't working, we'll probably pull back. When it does work, I think we'll probably go all in.
So the governor's already had this grocery store initiative. He's expanding it with the announcement yesterday, essentially saying that they're going to have even more tax dollars. So I think altogether right now it's up to $20 million for this program. I connected with Republican State Senator Don DeWitte out of St. Charles and asked him about his thoughts on taxpayers subsidizing grocery stores.
Well, I think there are some areas within the state, particularly in the inner city, as well as some areas downstate, that I think the initiative to kind of alleviate these grocery deserts, if you will, probably have some merit. They need some help in some areas that are particularly tough to make financial investments in, economic investments in. I think the grocery desert initiative is probably a good measure, and it affects the entire state.
So back to the governor. Yesterday, he was asked more about the grocery tax initiative, but he was also asked about the well, not the grocery tax, the grocery subsidy initiative. But he was also asked about the grocery tax as well. But the governor ultimately, the question here that he addresses was, is this to help offset the increased cost of goods? Going to the grocery store, it's getting more expensive. Have you seen the price of eggs lately? Well, the price of bacon and just all the other goods at grocery stores. Here's the governor talking about the subsidy program for grocers and food deserts, and it's not meant to alleviate the cost of groceries.
Program in the state of Illinois where we have farmers who are providing their goods directly to these stores. That may not be the case here, but it is in many other places. So that will help to bring down some of the prices. But this program is not intended to subsidize prices. It's intended to keep independent small grocery stores open, to help open co-ops like this one that are where the lieutenant governor talked about the Rise grocery store that's in Cairo, Illinois, and they had nothing there before. So you can imagine that this is now it's a community center, but it's also just a place for people to go get, fresh foods, fresh vegetables and fruits and meat that they never ever were able to get before. So the prices are not subsidized, but again, I'd remind you that we want to lower the grocery tax, in fact, eliminate the grocery tax entirely, which will help a little bit.
So again, the grocery tax elimination idea, Senator Don DeWitte says, is really going to cost taxpayers the way the governor has it spelled out.
It's about a $375 million hit directly to local governments. Look, the governor has yet to answer the basic question. He was extremely concerned about backfill for municipal governments when he cut the grocery tax while he was running for election 2 years ago. Why all of a sudden is backfill no longer a major issue? $325 million is a significant amount of money. It's police officers, it's firefighters, it's public works processes for municipalities. There's plenty of money in the LGDF fund that he is currently sweeping into the general revenue fund that could very comfortably backfill that $375 million for local governments. The governor has some questions to answer, and I don't know why he's refusing to answer it.
So again, Senator DeWitte actually has that idea to offset the local tax loss from the 1% grocery tax by having the local governments get their share of local government distributive fund dollars. But that's not the idea that's being advanced here. Democrats in the supermajority and the governor, they haven't taken that into consideration yet. We'll hear more from Don DeWitte on that, but here's the governor yesterday in Chicago.
Well, we intend to provide in the legislation that will be brought up in the General Assembly the ability for communities to reimpose that tax if they want to. I would not suggest it. I think that it is not proper to be taxing food. That there are other things that they can do to pay for the goods, services that they're providing in those communities. But that is an alternative for communities who choose not to take away this extremely regressive tax.
So you got Don DeWitte, again, Republican state senator from St. Charles, saying the governor's idea doesn't really help taxpayers at all. It just offsets who's ultimately going to be responsible for things like firefighters and public works and police and such.
I have had conversations with the other side of the aisle on this particular initiative. The answer I seem to get is the same answer the governor continues to put out, which is they will make legislation available. So if local governments want to implement their own 1% grocery tax, It's basically shifting the blame. There's zero benefit to taxpayers when the governor eliminates the grocery tax and then asks municipal governments to reapply it on the other side of the equation.
Zero benefits to taxpayers. That's the ultimate message there from Senator Don DeWitte in the back and forth about the grocery tax and whether or not to just get rid of it altogether or to offset the local losses with money that the state's already taking in through the income tax. So fascinating to hear that conversation. Here with Bishop on Air, we'll keep you updated on all of that and more. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Appreciate you guys.